Who gets to call themselves a bestseller? Let's talk about it. Hi, my name is Lauren Marie Fleming, and if you're new here, this is Letters from Lauren, a little experiment I'm doing to have a place to be imperfect and share the process of publishing my novels, self-publishing my nonfiction, and running a creative business, schoolforwriters.com. I am here to show up imperfectly. I have my polished podcast, School for Writers, and I have polished blog posts on laurenmariefleming.com, but I wanted to have somewhere where I could talk to you as a friend. And while I love the more professional work that I do, I missed the connection of my early days of blogging, and that is what the goal here is with this show, is to be here with you one-on-one, early days of trying something new. So this is unedited, unpolished, and I'm just coming here friend to friend. This is a question that I've been asked a lot, is who gets to call themselves a bestseller? And I ask myself this all the time too. Do I get to call Because Fat Girl a bestseller? What makes something a bestseller? So one of the questions that I get a lot is, how do I become a New York Times bestseller? And I think we often use the New York Times bestsellers list as the determination of whether you are a bestseller or not. But something that people don't understand is that the New York Times bestsellers list is actually an editorial list of what they believe to be the bestsellers of the nation. And it's not even necessarily who sold the most, but who a variety of booksellers are recognizing as a bestseller. I say that because sometimes self-published books can sell above and beyond, like seriously above and beyond, tens of thousands of above and beyond books than the books that make the list. But because they're only sold on Amazon or they're only sold on somebody's personal site, they don't count them. The New York Times editorializes, it calls various different independent bookstores from across the nation and asks them what their numbers are. They pull from Amazon, Barnes & Noble, from Ingram Sparks, and multiple other places to decide who gets to be on their list. It is an editorialized list. They take that grouping and then they decide themselves who the bestsellers are. Some people hate this idea. I think that I think it's a double-edged sword, right? So I have worked with entrepreneurs who have paid lots and lots of money to have big, huge book launches, and they even buy tens of thousands of books themselves for their stores and for themselves to look good. And I understand that people were absolutely buying their way onto the list. So this was their way of knowing who really sold the most books versus who they think was really a bestseller versus who sold the most books, right? That said, what it does is I've had friends who've been edited off the list. So they absolutely hit the numbers to be able to hit the bestsellers lists, but say they had too many sales from one outlet. So from only Barnes & Noble because Barnes & Noble was pushing their book, or from only Amazon because there were ads, or Amazon was pushing their book. So it can be a double-edged sword, because I think there are people who deserve to be on that list, especially self-published authors or genre authors, especially, that sell big numbers, that deserve to be on that list and are edited off. And I appreciate that they're trying to get a real idea of the popularity of a book within the industry. And it's that last bit that counts the most, right? Within the industry. So they're very much still tied to who the publishing industry, bookstores, brick and mortar stores, the people in the industry believe are the bestsellers, versus there are a lot of self-published authors, Amazon lists and USA Today lists and Publishers Weekly lists that are based off of who sold the most, based off of numbers. So you can look at the USA Today's bestsellers list, and there are 100 on that versus the 10 to 15 on the New York Times list, and you can get a general idea of who's really selling. So I have lots of friends who've made the USA Today list, but few friends who've made the New York Times list. And I think a lot of that is that I hang out with genre people who are really popular in certain areas, and they're often edited off the list. That includes romance and fantasy especially. And also, I think the USA Today list has genre fiction. The New York Times list often pulls different sections. So like there's YA, there's genre, there's various different things, and the USA Today list puts it all in one and has more of it. Publishers Weekly also does it based on sales, and Amazon is is off of sales for sure, but you can rig that system by doing huge launches and doing all this promo for 1 week and getting it on the list that way too, which is what people do for the New York Times bestsellers list too. So there are so many ways to get on a bestsellers list. My book, Because Fat Girl, is in the bestseller section of Hudson airports across the country right now. I've had some booksellers in airports across the country right now. You can see it in the bestseller section. Does that make it a bestseller? If it's being pushed in the bestseller section, can I call my book a bestseller? I have photos of it in the bestseller section. Is it a bestseller? And to answer this question, I have no freaking clue. I have no clue because transparency of numbers is really hard to get. And it's really hard to get not just because publishers often hold that tight to their chest for marketing and publishing purposes. It's also mostly, though, hard to tell because there are thousands of places my book is currently being sold. And we don't know all of those places. Every independent bookstore, it's in every Barnes and Noble. It's hard to check with every single Barnes and Noble to see if it's sold. It's hard to check with every airport, every independent bookstore to see if it's sold. And you don't actually count a book as having been a bestseller unless it sold the copy. So my publisher ships it to all these stores and they've requested it, but that doesn't mean consumers have bought it. And it takes consumers buying it to make those bestsellers lists, to actually be a bestseller, not just on the shelves. So I have no idea if my book is a bestseller or not. And here's one of the things I've been thinking a lot about that. Does it matter? Does it matter if my book is a bestseller? Here's where it matters to me. One, hitting the New York Times bestsellers list is a massive career boost for any author. It can help get you better book deals in the future. It can help you sell more books in the future, and it can really make or break a career. And I would say it wouldn't break a career. I would say it would really make a career. So there's always that thing, right? There's always that ego that desperately wants to hit the New York Times bestsellers list to say that you're a New York Times bestselling author. That sounds so cool. And my ego wants that. Even more than an Amazon, Publishers Weekly, or USA Today, right? There's still the prestige that the New York Times bestsellers list comes with it. And that prestige does open up doors. I've seen it. I've seen friends who've sold, let's take some numbers, who've sold 40,000 copies of their book overall, but it was never in 1 week. So the bestsellers list are how well it sold that week. So it was never in that week. And I know someone who sold 10,000 books at pre-order and of that week. And so they get to call themselves a New York Times bestseller because they sold more in 1 week, and pre-orders are included in that first week. So if you pre-order a book, it counts towards that first week, which is how a lot of people get on the list their first week. And now they can always call themselves a bestseller. They can always call that book a bestseller. So I have friends who've sold way more copies of their book, 3, 4, 5 times more copies of their book overall, but never made the list. But the people who get to say they made the list have better book deals and get paid better. So that's kind of a crappy scenario that happens there, but it does bring prestige, which is one of the reasons I aim for that list still. And the other reason I want to be a bestseller, and I think about this a lot, is what does it mean to have a book that I was told for decades would never sell? I was told that I'd have to flip the genders for anyone to want to read this. I was told it was offensive to lesbians by straight people, which is an interesting thing as a queer person to be told. I had some conversation with lesbians as well, but I was told it was just not marketable and it wasn't presentable and it was hard to decide and nobody would like it. So there's a part of me that wants to hit the list for like an FU to the people who told me I never could, that this book would never sell. So there's that. There's ego and then like spite. And then for me, there's also legacy. You have probably, if you've been following me for a while, heard me talk about why having my books that feature diverse, complex human characters with empathy. They're fat, they're queer, they're complex types of queer. They're not just cut and dry queer. They're loving their bodies. There are trans characters of color. There are people from various different backgrounds, and it reflects the diversity in my life. Like, I'm not just doing tokenism. Every character I create is based on somebody in my life or based for somebody in my life who's mentioned that they don't get to see books with characters like them. So I wrote a book with character like them. And it matters to me. Oh God, it matters to me. It is my life legacy to have more books like that on the shelf. my book, your book. This is why I run my program, Write Your Friggin' Book Already, and why School for Writers is dedicated to help diverse storytellers thrive, because we all deserve to see ourselves on the shelves, and too many of us don't. Or there's like one token book that we all read about ourselves. Or there are some books where they're all caricatures, or they're written by people who don't have our identities. And so there's a little bit of a disconnect from the reality to their stories that they tell for us versus us getting to tell our stories. And don't get me wrong, I'm happy to have people have diverse characters, right? I'm a white person who has characters that are non-white. I don't think we have to only write our own identities, but when the only people who get to represent us are other people who don't have that lived experience, that's hard. When I watch a person who identifies as straight getting lots of fame for writing a queer character, while my queer identified friends can't get their queer books sold because they're told no one writes and wants to read queer books, that's hard. It's hard. And so I want to hit the list because I want to show that stories like mine can sell, so more stories like mine are out on the list. Casey McQuiston's Red, White, and Royal Blue did a lot for gay romance. And yet, I know a lot of gay male authors who still can't get their gay male romance published. We need to be able to be the ones telling our story along with people who don't have our identities. Red, White, and Royal Blue is a great book. I'm glad it exists. It opened the door for lots of other books to exist. And I don't see the same kind of publicity push being put behind gay male romance authors. And I want to see that. I want to see both, right? Straight people get both. I want to see both. And so I want to hit the lists because that helps show that my book is out there in the world, and it shows publishers that books like it, diverse books with diverse characters and complex scenarios, will actually make it out in this world, will be profitable because they're still running a business, and then they'll invest in those. So that's why the books and the lists, matters to me. That's why I want to make the bestsellers lists. But I also wanted to point out that it doesn't matter if I can call myself a bestseller or not, if my book is everywhere. We can't get so obsessed with one singular goal, New York Times bestseller, and think that because Fat Girl is not a success because it hasn't. Because I can tell you the dozens of DMs I get a day from people whose lives have been changed by this book, the messages and comments and reviews that you can go read of people who finally got to see themselves in a book for the first time, who understood queerness more from reading this book, who felt better about their body from reading this book, who went and told their story and wanted to make their own movie or write their own book after reading this book is huge. So that's the list I'm thinking of. That's the list I'm focusing on. And one of these days, if I focus enough on that list, I'll hit those big ones. Thanks for listening today. Please head to laurenmariefleming.com/blog to read more and to subscribe to the podcast. And I hope to see you in the next episode.